Hello and welcome to the Half Court Press Podcast, the Omaha World-Herald. I'm Wilson Moore, joined as always by Jon Walker. Jon, how are you doing today? The people listening can't see, but Jon just saluted, so he's really feeling it today.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. No, it's a chaotic week. We're gearing up for, you know, state basketball. Not me, but like just, kind of our staff, state basketball. Um, and so, the kind of trickle down effect is I'm gonna be covering some hockey this week on Friday night. I got the UNO North Dakota game. So
Okay.
no, it's gonna be a fun week, an interesting weekend. I've got a pretty big story in the works, that I hope to have out either sometime Sunday or at the very latest Monday morning. And if you can't put two and two together on what that might be, um, then I guess you just have to wait. But I'm good. I'm good. How are you, Wilson?
I'm doing pretty well, yeah. Like you said, just kind of getting down into
Yeah.
the final nitty-gritty here of I think Creighton and Nebraska each have one game left. Uh,
Where's the
the
time gone?
Yeah, it feels like the season just started. I can't like for
Yeah.
Nebraska. Is Creighton's last game at home or on the road?
On the road. That's
Okay,
that's
so
it.
we
Last
we, we are both done entering the respective
Yeah.
arenas that we have spent so much time in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's I was walking out of, we'll talk about the particulars in a few minutes, but I was walking out of CHI last weekend and I was like, that is nuts. Like I feel like I just got here. And now, it feels like a lightning quick 30 days later, uh, the home schedules are done. And then you realize that it's been like 3.5 months. So that's the crazy part is kind of how quick the regular season's gone by. It always does, but I don't think we realize it in the moment. But now the calendar has turned to March and the real fun begins.
It is March. And
So
yeah, so each team has, well, like we said, one game left, but a lot of different scenarios still in play for the conference tournaments. I know Creighton got a nice little boost last night with
yeah.
UConn beating Marquette. Um, so yeah, what's Creighton's outlook going into the Big East tournament? What's the best and worst case scenarios for the Bluejays? Where are they likely to land?
Yeah, so it's probably pretty comforting for Creighton fans to know that the Jays are either going to be the 2 or the 3 seed in New York. They're going to be on the bottom half of the bracket. They're going to avoid UConn until a potential championship, right? Like that's just kind of how it's going to work out. Um, and either way, it seems we are destined for Creighton Marquette Part 3. The first meeting back in December, late December, was a classic in Milwaukee. Last Saturday's matchup was kind of in peril. We knew that the status of Tyler Kolek was in jeopardy with the oblique thing, and we find out that they announced him out, and they also announced Oso Ighodaro is out. So it was like, whoa, Marquette is now without their two best players, like all of a sudden. And so Creighton gets the jump there. And so all of that to say, they can either be the 2 or 3. They're essentially playing for tip-off times at this point, and to say we're the 2 seed. But either way, it seems destined. They're on a collision course. You guys hear my cat in the back? He wants in the conversation, man.
He's got some
But
opinions.
he's got some opinions. Yeah, exactly. No, uh yeah. So they can either be the 2 or the 3. They're playing for tip-off time essentially. But it seems like we're on a crash course, a collision course for a third matchup with Marquette on Friday night in Madison Square Garden. But yeah, that's it. I think the weighted projections have them at a 70% chance to grab the 2 seed. Um, and if that all kind of has to do with what happens on Saturday, but they seem to be in good position either way.
Yeah. Nebraska has a bit more of a range. The Huskers could be anywhere between the 3 and the 6 seed in the Big Ten tournament. Right now, where things stand, Nebraska is in third with Northwestern losing to Michigan State last night. That was big. And in some ways it's simple for Nebraska. If the Huskers beat Michigan, which that is quite attainable if you have watched Michigan this year,
Yeah,
most
yeah,
teams have done that. And if Nebraska does that, then they will get a double bye. They will be either the 3 or the 4. They can be the 3 with Wisconsin losing one of its last 2 games to either Rutgers, which feels unlikely, but Wisconsin's also been kind of on a free fall,
yeah,
or Purdue. And that's one that, in about a month ago, it seemed like a crazy marquee. This could be for the Big Ten matchup in the last day of the season, and now it is not at all.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Purdue has already wrapped up the Big Ten, which isn't even to say anything of how far Wisconsin has fallen from where they have number 6 in the
They
country at one
they were
point.
up to number 6 in the country when Nebraska beat them in Lincoln. They have lost 7 of their last 9.
Crazy how
The funny thing is I remember like a couple of weeks before then you saying, like, we could pull it, I'm sure. Like, we could sift through and find it. You said this isn't your dad's Nebraska or Wisconsin team. So it's just funny in hindsight that you derailed Wisconsin essentially.
apparently I
Yeah,
did.
yeah,
Like I no, you have me thinking that I remember that game a couple weeks before the game in Lincoln when Nebraska played Wisconsin in Madison. The Badgers just looked like a
yeah,
force. Like they just
yeah,
it was just methodical. Ball goes into Stephen Crowell, double team comes, kick out, swing, find the
yeah,
cutter, drive. Like it was so smooth and fluid. They looked like a team that like when at their best could beat anyone in the country.
yeah,
And it's startling how much they've fallen off over the past month. Yeah,
yeah.
I you see it on Twitter a lot. People saying Nebraska broke Wisconsin. Yeah, and then
Dude,
they had a
maybe
16
they
they had a
did.
16-point lead in that game at 16. I think
Yeah,
it was 16 at halftime. It got up to 19. Like it's like they were pushing for a number 1 seed at that point.
yeah, yeah. No, and the crazy thing is like you look at all the tournament projections, they tried to keep Nebraska or to keep Wisconsin in that like 3 to 4 seed range for a
Yeah,
while. Like even after the slide started, you'd be like, Wisconsin a 4 seed
yeah.
still? And now they're like fighting for their tournament lives. So yeah, man, the Big Ten has been interesting in the back half of conference play because you have a team like Nebraska continue to surge up the standings
Yeah.
and Wisconsin just absolutely plummet.
Michigan State got a big win for its tournament
Yeah.
chance last night, which I have been all year long. I have been on the Michigan State is not good train. Like it doesn't add up to me. Like where they drop in like the net and Ken Palm just
Yeah.
doesn't sit with they only have really like 2 or 3 good wins. Maybe like give them one more by beating Northwestern, and they're like 19 in Ken Palm. Which if you can find anyone who genuinely believes this is the 19th best team in the country, okay. But I know, speaking of me getting proven wrong, that they're gonna go in as like a 9 seed, and then
Oh,
you
for sure.
blink and they'll be in the Elite Eight, like because that's
Yeah.
what Michigan State does. But
Yeah. I've got to Creighton will close the regular season on Saturday at Villanova. And while we're talking about weird resumes, when you get a chance, I encourage anybody to do this because you'll probably raise an eyebrow, if not both. Villanova has a really interesting resume as well. They're like similar to the Michigan State, where it's just like, okay, you do not really have any marquee wins, you've got a couple of egregious losses and you're a metrics darling for
Yeah,
whatever reason.
but
So yeah, man. I don't know. Michigan State, Nova, they both seem like the teams that would squeak in and make a run out of
yeah, because
nowhere.
they're the teams that have done that. I mean, maybe less
Yeah.
you could talk more into Nova if Jay Wright was still their coach,
Yeah.
but I don't know that
Yeah.
ever
What
actually swung around to the original point I was trying to make. But Nebraska has a lot of different directions it can go over the weekend. Like I said, if they beat Michigan, then double bye, put it in Sharpie. They can't fall further than fourth. They've got a good chance at third with Northwestern losing last night. Lose to Michigan, and things get interesting because if they lose and Iowa beats Illinois, which that admittedly would be an upset,
yeah.
then they have the same record with Iowa holding the head-to-head tiebreaker. Um, and that's not getting into all the craziness that can happen if like five teams finish 11 and
Yeah.
9, which is possible. But there's too much to get into all the different scenarios of who goes where, of who wins what. But Nebraska can finish anywhere between third and sixth, going into the Big Ten tournament.
That's not a bad spot to be in. You would love to have the double bye, but I think, you know, if we would have sat here in August and said, "Hey, we can guarantee you a top six finish in the Big Ten," Nebraska fans would be like, "Perfect, sign me up." I
Oh yeah,
think.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I
Um,
think I had them
so
ninth or tenth going into the season, and that
yeah,
felt generous. I mean, there's nothing that can take away from this season for Nebraska. I don't even think you can make a case like they would ultimately benefit, or probably not because that would at this point because it would include losing to Michigan would probably
yeah,
nullify. But I remember thinking a couple weeks ago when things were still up in the air that Nebraska could benefit from not getting the double bye just because that's another game that they're likely to win. If you're the 5 seed and you're facing like the 11 in your first game, that's a decent spot to be in. It just adds, that's a neutral site win, which we know Nebraska can't get enough additions to its resume away from Pinnacle Bank Arena. But yeah, at this point, not getting the double bye would take losing to Michigan, and that's a black eye on the resume. And
yeah, yeah. That if you're playing a Purdue or a Wisconsin, even like you could say, yeah, if they dropped it, it wouldn't be the end of the world. But yeah, if you drop to Michigan, like I think Nebraska is in, but you would love to not ride into Selection Sunday with the most recent thing you've done is losing to Michigan,
yeah,
or like in the regular season, I guess, or so. Yeah, and then that would all just depend on what they do in Minneapolis.
yeah,
Nuts, nuts.
yeah,
Mm-mm-mm. We'll be on the road next week, huh?
it will be. Yeah, yeah. You'll
Mm-mm-mm.
be in New York. I will be in the greatest city in the world, Minneapolis.
Sir,
Yeah.
the Big Apple, some would say.
Well, the
The
mini
big,
apple.
yeah, the big mini apple. Yeah.
Yeah. Lots of apples. Earlier this year, I was in. To be clear, I don't know how our listeners know. I'm completely unironic when I say the greatest city in the world, Minneapolis, but that's not the point. Uh, yeah, and earlier this year, I was in Manhattan, Kansas, which is the Little Apple.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Shout out to Big 12, I guess. Big 12 found a way into a Big East and Big 10 podcast. No way. No way. No, I think the Big East could get pretty interesting here in this last weekend. Uh Outside of mentioning that it seemed like we're on a collision course for Creighton Marquette, there is the slimmest of possibilities that Marquette drops all the way to the 4 seed, and Friday night at the Garden would, in theory, be UConn Marquette. and Creighton would get Seton Hall in the what I guess quarterfinals at that point,
So
semifinals. I don't know. Yeah,
if you're Creighton, is that what Creighton wants to happen then? Is that the best case
absolutely,
scenario?
absolutely. I think Tyler Kolek will be back. Shaka Smart has kind of said, yeah, he's done more and more each day. We plan on giving him a go next week at the tournament. He'll be reevaluated. I mean, you're gonna have to beat one of them, either Marquette or UConn, to win the Big East. But you would love to not have to beat both.
Yeah, the
So yeah,
gauntlet.
I think if they could, if it would require Creighton beating Villanova, which who knows? Kyle Neptune said that's going to be Nova's Super Bowl because they need a marquee win for the turn for their resume, and the number 10 team in the country would just about do it. So Kyle Neptune's already said this is our Super Bowl. We have to have it. So who knows what happens Saturday? But yeah, if Creighton wins, Seton Hall wins, and if Marquette loses at Xavier, then it'll be UConn, Creighton, Seton Hall, Marquette as your 1, 2, 3, 4, and it would set up the Seton Hall semifinal for Creighton, which would just be a perfect case scenario for them. IMO.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
we'll see.
In the Big Ten, obviously Purdue is the favorite. But if someone beats Purdue, like there are five teams you could talk me into really believing could make a run. Like,
Yeah. Especially in that tournament like format, it does like you just have to be good every time you're on the court. You don't have to be good throughout 3 months. You just have to be good for those 4 days. And that's all it takes. We saw it with Xavier last year, kind of smacking Creighton in the Big East tournament. Creighton was a phantom foul away from the Final Four. So, you just have to be good for those 40 minutes. And that's all that matters this time of year, really. Um, so dude, I could see Nebraska. I mean, Nebraska seems like one of those teams that can get streaky at the perfect time.
oh, absolutely. I mean, they can have one of those games where they just get on a heater from deep, where it's just kind of
Yeah,
everything's clicking. Tominaga and Wilcher and Bryce Williams and Master just all knocking down threes, and they're tough to beat just on sheer
yeah,
volume. They take and make more 3-pointers than any other team in the conference, and that's there's obviously a lot of variance to that. I think you
right,
saw it in person, probably the best example.
right,
They couldn't buy a basket against Creighton. That got ugly quickly, but
yeah,
that also they beat Purdue and beat Wisconsin, in part. A lot went into those, particularly rebounding is always big for this particular Nebraska team, but just by, hitting three, CJ Wilcher caught
yeah,
fire against Wisconsin.
yeah, and like that's all it takes. That's literally all it takes for just a couple of games, and then boom, you have all the momentum you need heading into the most important time of year. Um, so yeah, man, if Purdue lost, I kind of hope they do. I would love to see how much it just opens up the Big Ten.
Yeah.
I could see like Ohio State winning the tournament if that in that scenario.
Ohio
Why
State's
not?
playing its best basketball of the year.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so is Indiana right now. They just won their third straight. I don't think Indiana's best basketball is good enough to win the Big Ten tournament, but not this Indiana
Yeah.
team. Um,
No,
but
no.
yeah, Ohio State. To your point of all it takes is 40 minutes before Nebraska's game against Ohio State, and the day before in his press conference, Fred Hoiberg said it's not who you play, but when you play them. And Ohio State's the perfect
Yep,
example of that. It's just
yep.
because they were always a team that was better than the sum of like that performed worse than the sum of its parts, like what they should have been based on who they had, based on, a starting five of Bruce Thornton and one of the best shooters in the Big Ten, Jameson Battle. Yeah, they've figured something out since by the time since firing Chris Holtman, Jake Diebler. At this point, it's more than just kind of your typical, you
Yeah.
know, boost you get after making a coaching change, which you see a lot.
Yeah. Like for comparison's sake, DePaul fired Tony Stubblefield, and everyone was in like the surge that you were just talking about. Everyone was impressed when DePaul stayed within 10 of Marquette for 30 minutes. Like those are surges, for bad teams. Ohio State's kind of turned a corner
Yeah,
since letting go of Chris Holtman for whatever reason. Um, yeah, no clue. I guess it's a lot easier to do when you are kind of in the mix and you've beat Purdue and yada yada yada, as opposed to being winless in league play. It's probably a little bit easier to see a light at the end of the tunnel. But kind of for comparison's sake, it's not that way everywhere. And so this is one of the positive examples. I guess not positive, but like good examples of how a midseason coaching change can flip things around. But it sure doesn't always work out like that. Not at
yeah,
all. So
yeah. You wanna briefly get into the last regular season games of the year?
yeah. Yeah. I think for Creighton, I you win, you get the 2 seed essentially. Or if Marquette loses, and they lose even, they'll get the 2 seed. Um, I don't know. I think, yeah, no clue. They probably have a little bit of revenge on their mind. We have an availability, in a little bit, so we'll kind of find out. But it was a long time ago. They opened conference play against each other on December 20th, nearly 3 months ago, which is nuts to think about. And I don't know if people remember, Villanova spoiled Doug McDermott night in Omaha. His shirt, the buildup, he says, I'm so thankful. Obviously, it even means more that it's against Villanova. And they hoist his jersey into the rafters, and Eric Dixon hits a three in the corner over the outstretched fingertips of Ryan Kalkbrenner to upset the Jays. And yeah, so you've got to think they've got a little bit of revenge on their mind heading to Philly this Saturday. All that to say, who knows? Who knows what's going to give? Is it the revenge? Is it Villanova's Super Bowl? It's got to be one of the two. But man, it just seems like Villanova's been somewhat of a matchup problem for Creighton over, the past few years. Those games are always close, always back and forth. If one blows one out, the other will do it the next time. It just you never know really what you're gonna get from this, except for good basketball. So I don't know what happens. But the good thing for Creighton is it's kind of inconsequential. I would prefer they get the 2 seeds, so so I meet deadline uh, on Thursday night next week. Um, but really, like again, if they get the 3 seed, it doesn't matter. I don't think. I think they'd get another crack at St. John's probably, which is maybe not completely ideal to play St. John's in the Garden again. But I think they get another crack at St. John's or maybe a Nova, depending on what happens. There's countless possibilities for like 5 through 9 in the Big East. So who knows? But it's kind of inconsequential in the grand scheme of things for a team that is, kind of already locked into a top 4 seed in March Madness, seemingly locked into a 3 seed. And I guess the consequence would be you can no longer jump to a 2 seed probably. which they were going to need help to do anyways. So
Yeah. Nebraska has a pretty simple task ahead of it. That is beat Michigan. Lots of teams have done that this year, to say the least.
yeah, yeah,
Michigan's been better at home this year, both because of the just the natural home road splits most teams have, Nebraska being an extreme example, but also because of Doug McDaniel's weird road game only suspension. So he didn't play at PBA last month. He will on Saturday, on Sunday, excuse me. And but yeah, that is a game that, on paper, lay it out, Nebraska should win. They led by 30 at PBA, which, maybe you have to do, to put that through the whole, home road conversion guide, which may be more extreme for Nebraska
yeah,
than most teams. You would think that should still end with a win for Nebraska. It would simplify things a whole lot for both the Big Ten tournament seeding. It would guarantee a double bye. It would also, like we mentioned, just solidify things for the Big Ten or for the NCAA tournament. The last thing the selection committee saw in the regular season would not be Nebraska losing to the worst team in the Big Ten. So it's right there for
yeah,
Nebraska. They just gotta take it.
yeah. I don't think they should have any problems, but again, we're talking about 3 weeks ago. This team didn't have a road win in the Big Ten, you know, and yeah, I don't know. I have no clue. I think they'd be fine, right? Like
Yeah, I
it
mean,
is Michigan.
logically,
It's
yes. I
this this year,
oh,
we're not talking about the Mo Wagners of the world.
no, we most
Jordan
certainly are
Jordan
not.
Poole is not Jordan Poole is not there to hit a buzzer beater. Like
No.
this is not the Fab Five. You would like to think Nebraska could stroll into Ann Arbor and come out with a win. But these Huskers have also struggled away from Lincoln this year. So who
They
actually
have, to
knows?
to say the least. They have struggled away
Yeah,
from Lincoln. But yeah,
yeah,
getting that win at Indiana was so big because there's really no precedent for a team making the tournament without winning a road game. Uh, which part of that's kind of interesting because just the mere fact that most teams that go 0-10 on the road aren't even close to
no,
the tournament. Like, if you
no,
go 0-10 on the road, you're probably not going 10-0 at home as Nebraska did this year, which if Nebraska Nebraska was in danger of losing all their road games. If they hadn't beaten Indiana, you could make a real case that they would be the greatest team of all time to go winless on the road in conference play. Like I think that would be a very
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but
absolutely.
luckily for Nebraska, the Huskers do have a road win and are no longer in that conversation.
Yeah, and I don't really think yeah, no, they needed a road win. I was gonna say I don't really think they would like if they went 10-0 at home, 10-0 on the road, and got a couple in the Big Ten tournament,
Yeah, I mean, like it was a
they
possibility.
they'd still be fine, you would think. But again, it would be so hard to look at a resume and be like, okay, so why are we going to send them somewhere they're not going
Yeah,
to win? So, but they've kind of put that to bed over the past couple of weeks. So,
yeah. Well, I think in the next episode, John will have a bit more to talk about. I think some
we'll have
things
brackets set.
will have
Yeah.
happened. Yes.
Yeah, it'll be good. It'll be this weekend, maybe more so than ever. The last weekend of the regular season, the first weekend of conference tournaments. Um, it'll be a doozy and a dandy. and everything in between.
It sure will be. This has been the Half Court Press Podcast. Thanks for listening.